So often observation might be referred to in the industry as ethnography. It could be social sciences. It could be site visits, field research, design research. It goes by so many different names. Really, the takeaway here is to get out of the building, to literally leave the building you work in, push your chair back under the conference room table, and go outside in the world and actually start to observe and meet with the people you're designing for. To bring this to life a little more, I was going to share a story with you about how I was taught observation techniques. And it's not very traditional. And I'm going to keep this short because I have in my notes a big red asterisk that says, don't fall into a rat hole on this one, because this is a conversation and presentation in and of itself. But for me, I was taught first by going to the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, which is where I went to graduate school. And we were taught some techniques, and we stood at a fish tank and we picked one fish, and we learned to observe and watch that fish through different filters, different lenses, whether it's time, movement, behavior. After a couple weeks, we were then upgraded to the Lincoln Park Zoo, where we would spend the rest of the semester observing the gorillas. And what's interesting about this is the approach and how you observe people was to teach you to dispel all the stereotypes and preconceived notions you have about what it is you're actually observing. So if we were to go out and observe people in the zoo, people in a public park, chances are good we'd make a lot of assumptions about what's happening. And what the professor was trying to get us to do is just be factual, just document and record what you see. We were taught writing techniques on how to take notes, photography techniques on how to capture the experience, and on how to come back and do analysis and synthesis. So I wanted to share this story with you just because I was pretty certain it would be unusual. It's not a very traditional way for most people to learn observation techniques. It's a great talk to continue at some other time. And again, it was just for me, it wasn't being better at drawing. It wasn't being better with words. The thing that I've learned the most is from observation techniques as a means to go back to that second point I made, which is looking to the problem for inspiration, not flipping through trade journals, not stealing someone else's idea, but just getting right to the heart of the matter. So on this last slide for look to the problem for inspiration, what I've said is that from observation skills, what's likely going to happen is you'll become more empathetic. And from that, you'll be a better designer. So when we talk about design thinking, user-centered design, human-centered design, all of those start with empathy. It's like you truly understand the needs and expectation of the person or the people you're designing for. And in those last couple slides, we were responsible for coming up with solutions and presenting them. So when people say user-centered, there's often a part of me that questions who's the user. There was a time it was a fish, it was a gorilla, and it was the caretaker. So it really changes your perspective of things. Another is when you think about design, it's really another lesson learned was to start with who you're designing for, what the problem is, and why that person would care about the solutions you're coming up with to that problem. And I think there's a distinction to be made there between when we deliver something, when we launch something, which has a lot to do with asking questions around how are we going to make it, when is it due, where will it exist, how much money do we have, how many people we have. It becomes very tactical. But I think there's a really great opportunity for designers, creative people, to get in the habit of asking and starting projects with the who, what, and why as a way to show more leadership, as a way to not be that pair of sort of happy hands that shows up late in the project just to make things look good. A good lesson that I was taught also, it's my caveat, is are you starting with a solution that's in search of a problem. So time and time again, you get into a meeting and someone starts with, I've got this really cool piece of technology, or we have the business metrics. Like, that's fine, but we still haven't figured out like what the problem is we're trying to solve. Right? Like, who is the person that we're designing for? What is the problem? Why will they even care? Now, these images, I have 3 case studies. I could easily share more. I just picked these 3: OXO Good Grips, GE Adventure Series, Access Now. OXO Good Grips has to do with kitchen utensils, and this solved the problem of individuals with arthritis, those oversized black handles, as a way to make kitchen utensils easier to use. They're more ergonomically correct. The GE Adventure Series is an MRI machine, but the story on the Adventure Series is all of the problems and anxiety and cost associated with pediatrics and how terrifying a lot of kids were to go into this machine for their health tests for whatever illness they had. And then down at the bottom, the story of Access Now. It's a little hard to see, but the young lady who says she's the founder of Access Now is in a wheelchair. And her story is she's wheelchair bound I believe, her entire life. And what she did with friends is came up with a crowdsourcing app in the city of Toronto that went to GoFundMe. And the idea was, using crowdsourcing, Yelp-like features, they could start to score places all around Toronto that would make their ability to enjoy life outside of an apartment more accessible and more enjoyable. So I don't want to get into too much detail about each one of these 3 projects. You can Google search them and find the story, but what they all have in common is all 3 are very successful businesses. All 3 use technology that exists, but what came before the technology and the business success, the spark here, was using observation to identify a need or expectation, whether it was arthritis, whether it was children going to the hospital and some of the things that they have to go through, like sedation, to go through this machine, or for the disabled, right, like more physical constraints. All right, so number 3, I'm not going to spend too much time on. So usually when you do these kind of things, like the top 3, the top 5, or the top 10 are a great number. Well, I came up with 4. That's because I couldn't get rid of this one, which is know your superpower. So it's worth mentioning, I'll give you the answer. I strongly believe every designer's superpower is to be visual. It could be in a prototype, it could be a sketch, a journey map, a diagram, a well-written headline, an article, a descriptive caption. It's everything but sitting there and talking at great length. So the reason I wanted to share this is I think you know that, but I'm often surprised how often people, both in the class that I teach, so it's an industrial design program, all the places I showed with you that I worked at, and even today, how reluctant people are to simply draw something, to bring something to life visually. So think of this as a reminder. Hopefully most of you already think like, yeah, you're right. You called it a superpower, but it means be visual. Talk less, show more. One story I'll share with you that, again, I hope feels a little different than some of the things I rattled off as examples, is when I joined M&T Bank. I'm hire number 1. I'm a team of 1. And what I'm trying to do is get all the people around me who love their numbers and addition and subtraction, things I really don't care for, to care about design. So I started with design, but it was perceived as superficial, didn't care. I took the conversation to user interface design. We're making apps, mobile apps, desktop applications, online banking, things in the digital space. Well, the attitude was most of what we have is provided by a third party, and they've already done the user interface, so it must work. And then for a while, I would think about UX, which is a bit too lofty at the time. So what I was really trying to do is look for the angle that I would take to get people to start to care about the customer experience and the value that design, user-centered design, brings to the conversation. So the image you're looking at is from one of the Thursday night Color Rush games from a few years ago, where the Buffalo Bills, dressed in red, took on the New York Jets, dressed in green. If anyone on the call is familiar with common accessibility issues, you'll know that red and green score very high on a scale of color blindness. So as soon as I saw that this game was going to come out red and green, and the stadium was green, and the field was green, I had a tendency that the next morning there would be some not so happy news headlines, stories around accessibility and what it was like. So this very vibrant game, for those with any visual limitations, color blindness, which is very common, looked like this. Everything was sort of a mossy green. The only distinguishing factor, if you look close, is in this image, the still. Both the Bills and the Jets are on the field, but they wear white helmets, dark uniforms, white stripes, and the only distinguishing factor to someone with color blindness is the logo on the helmet, which is hard to see because in the end, the Jets logo and the Bills logo is mostly an oval in shape. So the reason I was sharing this with you is it is my being visual, and it was a way, an angle, to get people at the company, M&T, to start thinking a little differently. Like I finally found something that they could hang on to. And what that was is I was trying to get them to care about usability and usefulness in a user interface. And I was kind of hit or miss. But knowing how much people at the bank and in Western New York love football, I thought, well, everyone's going to have an interest in this story. The angle I took was accessibility, which is a principle of good design, right? Good accessibility. And what that led to was getting people to see what it was I was trying to say in terms of why good design is good for business, good for the customer, through the lens of accessibility. And they're like, okay, I get it. And then I would back up the conversation from accessibility is achieved through good usability. Good usability is achieved through good design. And now I built a thread or a path for them to hang on to. And if that wasn't enough, if anyone's familiar with web content accessibility guidelines, the world of law, if a company in the public domain produces anything that is not deemed accessible, there's legal action. So I said there's a lot of risk associated with some of the things we're doing. And trust me, when I got to legal consequences and risk, it really helped amplify and solidify the conversation about design and why people should care. So I wanted to share a little bit about that with knowing your superpower. If you need a statistic, 90% of the information that's transmitted to our brains is visual. Of all of our senses, human beings are notoriously visual dominant. I think that's why the way we see things is so important. I would just argue that a rough board sketch, no matter how crude it is likely going to be preferred by your teams, your clients, as opposed to a multi-page document or lengthy discussion. And if there's any words of encouragement, I would just remind people all the time that your day job as a design professional, a creative professional, is not a fine arts drawing class. Don't self-censor. Just keep it really simple. And if you were looking for a reference, I've really loved this book, Understanding Comics, for two reasons. One, if you read it, it does do a great job of what it says it will do. It helps you understand the world of comic book art. But when you read it from a different perspective, what it's really doing is helping you understand the visual language that lives in the world of comics and how that can play into simple sketches, right? Like the power of a stick figure, not doing art class, being more visual, and sort of the language that's there. So when you read it, it's like, yeah, I don't have to be a professional artist. I can be anyone and I can just like try to help you see what I'm thinking. So I share this a lot with people at work, and it kind of helps break the ice and get them to stop self-censoring and just pick up a marker, bring in some images, do a show and tell, and say like, I want you to see what I think is a good idea or a bad idea. All right, so the last one, lead by design. So it's pretty self-explanatory. The reason I wanted to bring it up is, again, so often I sit in the meeting, whether it was in any of those companies I showed you on the West Coast, any experience in the Midwest, or anything I've experienced on the East Coast, where a conversation starts, a meeting gets started, a project's up and running, and the technology team comes in and says, look at this, look what I can do. Because we can do it, shouldn't we do something with it? And all of a sudden, all the momentum picks up around technology and solutions. Then the business folks come in and say, here's metrics, here's the bottom line, here's what we have. I'm like, okay, all that's fine. But if I go back to what I talked to you guys earlier about, of not so much the mechanics, but can you tell me again what the problem is and who it's for and why do we think this is even worth pursuing? I think that that is a sweet spot for a lot of people in the creative profession, design, all the other disciplines I've rattled off, to have a place to insert yourself and start to show leadership by design. So here, I'm curious how many people know who this character is. If we were in a room together, I'd ask you to raise your hands and take a poll, but because we're virtual, I'll just tell you it's Cousin It. Cousin It is a character in the Addams Family, which was a TV show in the 60s and a movie done not so long ago. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is when I go back to that example of sitting in meetings or listening to people make a case for good ideas and bad ideas, I am often surprised at how often I hear people use the word it. Like they might say, the thing we're here for today, before we get started, just know it's due. It is due by the end of the week. Or someone might say, do our customers want it? Or the client might ask you, like, it will be intuitive, right? Like it's just a known thing. Whatever it is will work with our existing code. We haven't even, discussed what it is we're talking about, but someone's already come up with a schedule. They've got some criteria. The client might say it needs to pop. When I sit in these meetings, what's happened over the years is I keep hearing people say it as the thing we're talking about. And in my head, all I ever think of or imagine is Cousin It. And if you look closely, Cousin It has no shape, gender, race, or anything. It's this kind of neutral, hairy blob. And when I sit in those meetings, that's all I'm really picturing. So I've learned to use that both to entertain myself in a lighthearted way, I smile, but also as a sign that a lot of people are talking about it, but no one has defined what it is. They haven't defined what the problem is. They haven't defined who the customer is. They haven't defined sort of the benefit or the value proposition. All they're doing is telling you more of the mechanical, factual things of it's due tomorrow, or it needs to work with this type of code that we already have. I'm like, I still don't know what we're doing. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's meant to be a little bit more colorful, just to kind of get you to tune in to when you're in those meetings and you're thinking like, how do I show value? How can I get ahead of this? How can I show good design is good for business? Like demonstrate the value of design. I've just learned to listen to all the times people use the word it in their explanation, and then just, let them finish and then politely interject with, can you say more about what you meant by it? Right? Do we even know what the problem is? Can we unpack it a little more? Can I go to the whiteboard and start to sketch things? So here is my thoughts are not to let it be the subject of the conversation. I was at an event last October out west, and they had the former CEO of Home Depot and other companies come, and he gave a comment, a quote that I have here on leadership that I really liked. He said, at the end of the day, you'll never have all the information, you'll never have all the resources. Just learn to start from where you are, use what you have, do what you can, and bring people along with you. So I just wanted to add that to my conversation about Cousin It. I know Cousin It is meant to be a little more entertaining, hopefully memorable. But this quote I thought was really nice because it's very action oriented. And then one thing I've learned too is patience and persistence. And the super short story here as I finish up is when I came back home and I was going, through all these different experiences of some of the places I worked, everyone knew what design was, why it was important. No explanation needed. That was not the case when I came back home to M&T in Western New York. I was in a very different space. And that's kind of like trying to show the value of design. And if I've learned anything, it's be patient with the people around you, especially the ones that are trying to learn, but also be persistent with what you believe is true. So the persistence would come back to your perspective. Like, I believe it's inclusive, I believe it's valuable, I believe it should be transparent, but it's going to take some time for the folks around you to come along and not to get discouraged. And just the last thing is this photograph I have that says patience and precision. I saw that leaving work one day, going to meet a client after work. I read it as patience and persistence. So that's where the phrase came to mind and it helped me. It actually says patience and precision. But what that place is, it's on 430 Delaware Avenue. And I looked it up, it happens to be a tattoo parlor. So one of the best lessons I've learned has come from the storefront window of a tattoo place in downtown Buffalo. But when all is said and done, patience and persistence is like a really nice way to put a bow on everything I've shared with you as you think through some of those different approaches. All right, so that was my 30 minutes. And this is, again, just a summary of everything we talked about. So have a perspective about design. I really just encouraging you to think about your definition of what design is, what success looks like. I told you the story of the fish, the gorillas, and the importance of looking to the problem for inspiration, and recommended observation as a great way to tap into empathy, like understand the person and behaviors. Know your superpower is visual, and then lead by design is just to embrace what it is you do and don't think that everything is business or technology led. I mean, you can't develop something until you design it first, and I don't know how you can go into business with anything unless you design that something first. Like, and all of that is like, you have to design it before you develop it. You have to develop it before you can sell it. I think there's a lot of opportunity for design to get ahead of the curve in a lot of day-to-day situations, whether it's a startup or a corporation. So that's it for me, Aaron.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Before, I have a couple questions for you. Also, everyone in the chat is still open. If you have anything, drop it in there. I'm more than happy to ask it to Mike. And like he said, too, he's open for conversations post. Thank you again, Mike, for the presentation. Also, too, to plug the last design track event tomorrow, actually. 3 o'clock, design panel, future of design. Stop in, see us. I think we're going to be talking about some really cool and interesting stuff. But to that, first thing I want to ask you, Mike, actually going back to the lessons you learned in observation, when observing whether it's the fish or the gorillas, was there anything that you actually observed that you learning to get rid of your observations and your assumptions and all that stuff, was there anything through that observation that you learned that really surprised you and really like kind of solidified that lesson learned?
Yep. Yeah, the number one lesson learned was how often we all make assumptions and then turn those assumptions into fact, and whether they're truth, right or wrong, those facts become the requirements for moving forward. So when looking at a fish or a gorilla, long before we would go to learn how to watch people, you'll catch yourself saying, I think the fish is doing this because it's hungry. Nope, you're not a fish, you don't know. Or you think the gorillas are interacting this way because of this dynamic. You have no way to prove it. So what you realize is just to be factual, but at the same time, you catch yourself like the first round of notes, the first round of photography and photo assessment was a lot of redlining, which is fact or assumption, and the number of things that you go through and how assumptive they are as the first sign of be careful of that. Because the assumptions can take you, like it's okay to have an assumption if you're willing to test it, but often people like to take the assumption as fact and then take the quick way to go solution.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Also too, the mentor that you brought up at the beginning of the presentation, it was very clear that he didn't have a design background. Today, especially people going through hiring processes, and is it important to have a design degree, right? Like, or if not, what skill sets do people need to have and portray to be a successful designer?
Yeah, so sure, it'd be nice to have a design degree or design background, but to answer your question directly, no, I don't think it's mandatory or required. A lot of the folks that are on the user experience team at M&T Bank do not have a very traditional background. What I would say I've always looked for is 3 characteristics. One is empathy, the second is humility, and the third is curiosity. So if you put all of these people who we consider good and successful into the hopper, I think those would be the 3 key attributes that come out. It's not whether you can draw, it's not whether you can write beautiful sentences. All of that is important, but I think the common denominator was empathy. It's like you really care about like who this is that you're designing for and what the problem is. Humility would be something to your first question, which is, I'm not so arrogant to think that I know the solution or I know what's going on. I will do my homework to go figure out like what is really happening in this situation. So it's very unlikely that you're designing for yourself is the reality. And then the third one was curiosity. And I do think that's where the creative engines kick in, which is I'm curious. I want to learn more. I will dig deeper. I will be willing to do simple sketches, crude prototypes, rough drafts, and be willing to put them up in front of people to get feedback and take some direction from that.
Great. One of the questions from the audience is, how do you balance the art and the science of design?
Well, it is an art and a science. So a little bit of intuition comes in and a little bit of testing and measurement comes in. So there definitely is an art and science, the balancing that spectrum. I think I know what the person's saying is that if you drew a spectrum, you could put at one end art and at the other end science or engineering, and right in the middle would be design. Design is often meant to live right between the world of art and engineering, whether it's coding or manufacturing, and I think that's where the tension comes from. So it is a balance of really, is the thing you're being asked to do about self-expression, about you or about a brand? If that was the case, my design approach might tilt a little bit towards the art end of the spectrum, more about self-expression. But if I was trying to do something that's more tactical, mechanical, productivity oriented, utilitarian, I think my design approach would then, I'd allow it to lean or tilt more towards the other end of the spectrum, which would be more of a science mindset, more of the engineering.
Cool.
So it's trying not to be like one size fits all.
Every problem is different, right? So
yes, yeah, that's a much better way of saying what I said, which is every problem's different. So don't pretend your process is linear or your toolkit is set. It's just like, first, what's the problem? Then I'll go figure out how I'm going to dig in and approach it further.
Also, too, I guess difference between large organizations, small organizations. Small organizations obviously have limited resources, and inclusiveness is a problem. So, how do you ensure inclusive design when you have limited resources?
That for me has often been the motivator to be inclusive is when the team is small, when the team's underpowered, or there's not enough skill set, is it's going to start to force you to look around you for those people you can pull in to help. So that's a lot about what it meant to be inclusive, transparent, to not make people, for example, in my case, who consider themselves bankers, who are great at numbers, who are also very logical thinkers, to ever believe that that means they're not creative, that they can't do this. So much of what I've been trying to do is it's often called, that's kind of the fancy term, is psychological safety, which is helping people get comfortable with being uncomfortable and saying like you can pick up a marker, you can go do observation. It goes back to the one of the first slides of it's human nature to design, to make things different, to make things new, to make things better. You just have to allow yourself the confidence to go through that process. So often when it's resource constrained, like you asked, that more than anything is what motivates me to go try to find people around me who we can bring into sort of the team, right? Like part of the group that's going to figure this out and figure out how to add value. And
Yeah,
I
I think
often
that.
prefer that.
No, I think that's
Go ahead.
very important too, because everyone in the organization has a great idea, and everyone in the organization will have some vision of what they think it is. Right? It's just to your point. Um, some people just don't want to make it visual, right? And when it's visual, then people can talk to the idea more and they can flesh it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your question often leads to what people would call a multidisciplinary team that's choosing to be resourceful and helpful, as opposed to a team of like-minded people. Like we're so big as a design team, we're so big as a UX team or engineering team, we have what we need, no one else is allowed in, we'll figure it out. But then you have a lot of similar thinking, not at all multidisciplinary.
So my last question for you is, and there's still some more coming in through here, but let's go to the audience first. What is your favorite book on UX design? Sorry, what is your favorite book on UX or design thinking, etc.?
Yeah, favorite book, it's called Universal Principles of Design, Rockport Publishing. And what I really like about the book is it's well designed, and I think it's about 100 total principles. And what they do is they pull from the world at large, from data science, from marketing, business, design, research, psychology, and tell you that there is a proven principle in the world about how people think and behave. They give you a description, and then it concludes on that page with, here's how it shows up in the world. So what it does is helps you to see that there is a reason why certain things happen. So it's called Universal Principles of Design.
Great.
Yeah, if I could buy it for everyone, I would. And I've said that before at work. I just can't afford to do that.
Another question just came in. At M&T, how early in the project process do they bring that project to you or design?
The good news is it's happening much earlier. So much of where I will enter a project and some of the team is in what we call phase 0, or the framing session, which is asking right up front, what is the problem and what is the outcome? So if I were to look just at those 7 years at the bank, when I showed up, I would have started someplace very tactical, like a UI fix, a usability fix, which would be very late in the process. And that was done out of necessity. I'm just constantly looking for a place to get inserted and show value. over time, as I learned more about the company and the culture and seeing how it worked, I had a lot of success with the team in being able to back up how the company works and thinks to get very, very early in the process. So I'm constantly trying to get up to the front of the line, as they say. And that's probably been one of the things I'm most proud of in my time there.
And then a follow up with this, and I think it's really like in the product life cycle. How often are you guys involved and contributing the design team?
Yeah, the goal has always been to be a part of the process through the beginning, the middle, and end. Like I said, there were times when I was starting, when it might have been just a team of 3, we would almost take whatever we could get our hands in to show value. But now, anything that we sign up for or dedicate to starts at the beginning, goes through the middle of the process, and is there through the end, or sort of the loop that happens. Because I've never wanted to build a team or build the capability to feel sort of like an agency or a consultancy, which is not bad, but we're not an in-house agency or consultancy. The idea was to be dedicated and committed to the work. So that meant making sure that we could be there throughout the life cycle of the project. It's not like sort of like a fly in, swoop in, and then just fly away that evening. Just say, that's it, I'm out.
Well, I think that's the value of having an internal team, right? So you have somebody there, be there the entire time. I mean, agencies and consultancies are great, but they're only there as long as they're being paid for. So
yeah, they're there for a specialized space, and we bring them in too as part of the process. You're right.
Also, too, as like, and I feel myself being in this space for a number of years now, it feels that the tone is changing around design. Do you see that happening as well? And is it something that is now kind of more commonplace to include design right away? Is the fight still needing to be there, I guess, is where I'm getting at with this?
The fight's still there. However, like I said, in my time, if I just bookmark it to the 7 years Western New York at the bank, I've absolutely seen a progression towards a better place. We're still fighting, we're still advocating. The biggest change I've seen is those people who now advocate for us at the company. There have been situations where none of us on the UX team are in a room, like a meeting, but someone will say, shouldn't someone from that team be here? Or our CEO or executives will refer to one of us by name, or send new hires to see us, as a way of like, what they're doing is a good example of what all of us are trying to do differently, like how to think differently, how to work differently, and just how to integrate that with the things that have made the company successful over the decades.
Well, that's great to hear. Especially that means it's baked into the culture at this point in time, right?
Yeah. That to me is the big goal, is like make it a bank-wide capability. This idea of being customer-centric, design-centric, or design-led. So have it be a capability, and then if we have more success, someday it'll just be part of the fabric or the culture of the company, where all employees would be introduced to it, for example, at new employee orientation day, right? The company is very risk adverse, the company is a community bank, and by the way, we're also customer-centric, and here's what that means. Here's how design shows up.
Another question from the group: is M&T working in a more of a Scrum methodology, Waterfall, and then I guess I'll add a little bit to that. How does design work into that too, right? How does the design thinking process revolve around kind of the development?
Yep. Yeah, it's making a very, very big shift from Waterfall to Agile, to the point where if Waterfall is almost a 4-letter word, Agile is the best thing you can say in terms of delivery and development. And we are looking for ways to constantly make sure that part of the Agile release train teams, like those dedicated Agile teams, have UX or UI representation, or I'll just say design representation as necessary. That would be part of the core team.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think we're gonna call that a wrap. Really great, and I say that really great content. Again, thanks, Mike. It was great to see also too from your perspective, being here and going away and coming back and really seeing how what it takes to influence change in an organization, especially a big one, and
Mm-hmm.
finding those things that resonate with people's initiatives and understanding to actually see that value in design. Because that once they see it, I think everyone then loves it, right? They understand the value.
Yeah, it's helping them see what you're talking about, and then they literally see the value.
Mm-hmm. So thanks again. For everyone else too, we recorded this, so this will be available post startup week. And thanks again, and Mike, talk to you later.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care.